To understand classes, let's understand object-oriented programming. Now, depending on your level of knowledge and if you worked with modern JavaScript and maybe also some other programming languages, you might be aware of what classes are there for and what OOP, object-oriented programming, is all about. So therefore, you can also skip this lecture to jump right ahead to the parts where we write code. Otherwise, definitely stick with me because it is important to understand this. The idea behind object-oriented programming, and classes will be important for that as you will see, is that you work with real-life entities in your code, you could say. So that you work with things in your code, with objects that resemble real-life objects as far as possible at least, to make it easier for you as a developer to reason about your code. For example, we might be building an online shop and there we might have a product list. We might want to work with a product list object, therefore, which has everything we need to manage a product list. A method to add products, to delete products, the list itself. So, for example, this might be an object that is responsible for rendering a list of products and for managing it, which were fetched from a server, so from a database. So this product holds all the rendering and fetching and management logic. Now, that's a product list. In our program, in the website we're building, we might also need to work with the individual product though. So we might also want an object or multiple objects, one for each product, that is responsible for managing this single product. It might hold and render the details about that product, maybe allow us to add it to a cart, things like that. So when we want to draw a user interface to the screen, and we want to manage that through JavaScript and therefore through TypeScript, then we could implement this with a product list and a product object, which hold the logic for managing the underlying data, but also for rendering the content on the screen. And of course, therefore, these two objects would kind of be related. We might also have a shopping cart object on our screen, which is responsible for rendering and managing the shopping cart. It's of course also connected to the product, and therefore it holds all the logic we need to render our shopping cart, placing orders and communicating with the server, and so on. So that would be one way of how we could think about the application we're building, how we could split it into logical pieces that make sense to us as humans. And in code, in TypeScript, in JavaScript, in most modern programming languages, this is actively supported because we have objects, which are more complex data structures that hold properties and methods. And of course, we do have that in JavaScript as well. But we might also have classes that help us with that. Now, what's the idea behind classes and what are instances? Well, we got these objects, and when following this object-oriented approach, we could consider splitting our app or our application logic into such objects which manage parts of our logic. Now, connected to the idea of using these objects, which of course do exist in JavaScript, we can use objects there, is the idea of having classes. Objects are the concrete things we work with in our code, the data structures we use to store data, to store methods, to execute methods on. Classes are blueprints for objects. Classes allow us to define how objects should look like, which data they should hold, which methods they should have, so that we can easily build objects based on these classes. And we then call this instances of the classes. So an object then is an instance of a class if it's based on such a class, so that we can quickly replicate multiple objects with the same structure, the same methods, based on the same classes. So classes help us define how objects should look like, which properties and methods they have, and so on. So classes exist to speed up the creation of objects, and it's simply an alternative to using the object literal notation you already know. They simply make it easier, classes simply make it easier to create multiple objects which generally have the same structure and the same methods, and which might only differ in the exact data details which are stored in there. Let's say we have multiple persons we want to represent with objects. Well, each person might have a name and an age, the values will differ, the general structure is the same. So that's the theory. Let's see it in practice.